Amazing. Thank you all so much once again for being here. Good evening, everyone. My name is Diana Alvarado. I work full-time for a college success and career development nonprofit organization based out of Boston, and also work with College Essay Guy and the Matchlighter Scholars Program. And part of my portfolio is creating this FGLI webinar series. So I'm very excited to be here with you all today. Today's topic is going to be titled Overcomplicated and Undermatched. And we're going to be discussing strategies for essentializing the college list building process for low-income students. I know that we are kind of in that early spring period where a lot of counselors are sending off their seniors, finalizing their decisions, and now we are starting to think about our juniors and what next year is going to look like for the college application process. So really hoping that today's topic speaks to a number of you. We have two amazing presenters today. Nitzia Cuevas Macias, who is the Director of College Programs for Downtown College Prep, and our very own Tom Campbell, who is our community manager here at College Essay Guy. I will go ahead and let them introduce themselves in a minute, but first just wanted to go ahead and go over some housekeeping items. So as usual, this session is being recorded and you will all get a follow-up email after the fact with any resources and questions, as well as a viewable copy of this slide deck. So you can go ahead and check out all of the resources after this session. Captions should be available at the bottom of your screen for accessibility purposes. And this is a Zoom webinar, so you should be able to ask questions in the Zoom Q&A box throughout the session. And then Nitsi and Tom will go ahead and answer those questions at the end of the session. Additionally, our moderator Jasmine is going to drop the live session survey poll in the Zoom chat. This poll is super important because we really want to know what you as FGLI counselors and supporters are looking to learn more about as we continue building out this series. So really hoping that you all take a moment to fill out that poll. And we'll be sending out a free copy of Ethan Sawyer's book, College Admissions Essentials, to one of the people who fills out the form tonight. So please go ahead and do that once the link is dropped in the chat. And again, any questions, feel free to use the Zoom Q&A box. But in the meantime, I will go ahead and pass it over to Tom and Nitzia to give an introduction to themselves, and then we'll go ahead and get started.
I will go in and jump first. Thank you so much, Diana, and hello to everyone who is tuning into this session. So my name is Tom Campbell. I use he, him pronouns, and I am College Essay Guy's community manager. So prior to working at College Essay Guy, I worked in college admissions at Pomona College and College of the Holy Cross, where I definitely got a good, I think, exposure to the admission process. And then I worked with students and families who are applying to colleges from Lakeside School in Seattle, Washington. So definitely, I imagine many of you tuning into this call are working in spaces and schools that predominantly serve first generation and or low income students, underrepresented students of color. And that's definitely something that, I just am very transparent about that, especially working on the high school side. I was working in an environment where majority of students were not of that population. So if any of you tuning in happen to be from one of those schools and are like, hey, how do I tell my students who really need advice that is sometimes it's contradictory to the overall narrative that we have in our school around like overinflated expectations. I am definitely going to try to touch on some of that personally, as well as just some general information about undermatching. But it is not just me, which is such a lovely gift to me and to all of you. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Nitzia, who we have collaborated before on a wonderful podcast about academics. And I'm so glad that she's back in action for more College Essay Guy goodness.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, Tom, thank you for the introduction, and thank you for creating this space and inviting me to support in this conversation. My name is Nitzia Cuevas Macias. I was a director of college programs at Downtown College Prep. I am a freshman student, born and raised in California. For the last 15 years, I've been working in educational settings, and for the last 10, I've been focusing and working with students in the college access and success pathway, right? The to and through model of the work that we do. I did my undergrad at Berkeley, and I did my master's at San Jose State. And I really like having these conversations and open conversations because sometimes it's hard to navigate. What the politics sometimes behind it, the emotions that with students and families that come with it, in a way that we still want to be student-centered, or we still want to support everyone in this wraparound process. And as things are so fastly changing in our field, what does this mean for sometimes our most vulnerable students when these policies are rolled out? So, yeah.
Sorry, I was muted. I was like, awesome. To myself. So actually, if you want to go and let's see, I believe we're doing, I'm just being very candid with you all. We were doing some slide finagling, mostly formatting stuff that I was like sitting there being like, you know what? I'm not going to love that one of them is not bolded. So if you want to just unshare the screen for a second, Diana, and then just share it again, I think that we should be good to go. Hopefully. So in terms of today's agenda, what we're going to do is just spend a little bit of time in the beginning talking about the concept of undermatching. Just kind of what that is. So we all have kind of a norm on that particular definition. And then Nita will go ahead and kind of talk about some specific insights and experiences related to her illustrious career in many different educational spaces, which has been so interesting for me to hear about, and how, yeah, different schools and educational institutions have different challenges when it comes to exposure to a wide range of college options that are out there and best fit options. And then we'll kind of close out with, I'd say some of the more pragmatic parts of the presentation, which are, resources that you can direct students and families to, just best practices in terms of informing students and families of, the range of options that they can think about. And then we'll see how much time we have for questions. So in the meantime, please do feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom, because we really want, this to be as relevant to all of you tuning in as possible. Great. Awesome. Thank you. So Undermatching, again, this might not be so groundbreaking from all of you tuning in here, but just so we're grounding ourselves in some shared definitions and understanding, just kind of want to point to this, why undermatching is such a, I'd say, big task, or something that ourselves as educators, as counselors, people who have the capacity and a platform to reach students and expose them to a wide range of options. It is something that data really does show that there is a dire need for students, especially students who are coming from low income backgrounds, to have a broader understanding of college, what that can be, how that it is not one size fits all, and yet how there are certain options that students and families sometimes may be automatically kind of discounting or not considering, oftentimes based on a lack of exposure and or fear around things, especially related to affordability and sticker shock. So something that, is really, I'd say, I work with a lot of, students from various populations, and many of those happen to be people from high socioeconomic backgrounds. And I've had to curtail a lot of myths around why certain application pools are ballooning, especially at more elite and selective colleges. I know a really big myth that is pervasive in several, I'd say, higher income communities is that there are students who are low income, first generation students of color that are applying in droves at these schools. But the reality, as someone who has worked at those schools, and as I know many of you, I'm sure know, is that a lot of these schools actually do not have the applicant pool of these highly qualified academic students, who are coming from these underrepresented backgrounds. Those students are not represented as much in these application pools by and large at these selective colleges, which tend to have some of the most generous financial aid programs for students from especially low income backgrounds. We can have a whole other session about the students kind of in the middle of the bell curve, which I'd say our education system is really struggling to serve right now, which is with the way that certain things have broken out. But this is definitely something that is, as someone who read applications for so many years, it was really painstaking for me to see that, like, there are amazing students that I know are out there who just are not putting their hat in the ring at these places for a wide variety of reasons. And seeing our roles as a chance to be able to try and encourage and empower students to try to put that hat in the ring. You don't have as much to lose other than time in your day by putting together the application, writing an essay, for example, some requirement that may be in there. And when you look at these application pools that have ballooned, I have lots of data and resources I can show with you about this. It tends to be students who are not coming from the backgrounds that we're describing today. So, Lisa, I don't know if you have anything to add really to that point, but.
No, I mean, I think you and I've had a kind of like a quick conversation of like, why does undermatch happen? Right? Like, why are we even having this conversation? And it's not to, again, unmotivate students from applying also, right? Because I think there's also, we're seeing that the application pools are getting to numbers that we're just like, what is happening, right? But we also want to make sure that the students that are strong applicants have a great narrative, have a great journeys, are taking advantage of the opportunities that they've worked so hard for, right? And sometimes, we are seen as, or we feel that we're not worthy of it for whatever reason, right? And I think it's also encouraging and empowering the students in this process that yes, and right, our lovely, our lovely model that yes, you can do this, we're here to help you.
Yeah. Funny story about Yes and when Nitya and I did our podcast together, it was the week that that song by Ariana Grande was released, and we said that phrase probably like 12 times the episode. So very timely. I'm sure people were like, oh, they were on it. Like they knew to use it. I'm like, no, that was all Nitya. So and this just to kind of provide a little bit of a contrast to the term undermatching. And it's something that actually the more counselors that I've engaged with and talked about this challenge, just in terms of statistically the amount of low income students who are not graduating from college, the amount of students who are, the kind of stagnant, I'd say, pipeline of students, right? Compared to other populations, the percentage of students who identify as low income are not increasing when it comes to applying to college compared to other populations. So this is something that kind of is, I guess, slightly a bit of a counter maybe. And we have the resources again that we'll share in the slide deck for you. But sorry, this is a pretty text heavy slide here. But all this is to say that, we talk about academic undermatching and the cons of turning, not attending a school that you have the academic profile to attend and be successful at. And kind of self-selecting yourself out of the running at those places.
Yeah.
But it's also important to recognize too that, that can be a little bit of like a deficit model, right? And that there are valid reasons culturally, personally, as to why many students may choose to want to stay closer to home. Many students may want to choose an option to go to a two-year college and transfer in. It's a matter of kind of, I'd say, laying those options out there and going through the pros and cons, and not making assumptions, right, about, well, I know better than you about what you need to be, where you need to be applying, where you should be putting on your list. And it's meeting with the students as much as you can in the capacity of your role, because we know that in-person meetings and trying to get a sense for like what an individual student needs is the ideal, right? I think, many of us, if we could have a small caseload of students that we could work with, more people, right? I'm preaching to the choir. That's something I know we wish we could have, but this is just a point I wanted to fold in here just as a food for thought around advice that we're going to be sharing. We're going to try to be as comprehensive as possible, but know that just it's not going to be a match for every single student who walks through your door or your Zoom room. Yeah. One, data point that I found really interesting from some of the research on undermatching is that it actually does for many students statistically relate to lower satisfaction with education, right? So if students are enrolling at colleges where they can do more, they can surpass kind of what is the current culture of the institution that they landed at, sometimes, many times, often for convenient reasons, affordability reasons, lack of awareness around financial aid policies that may have been appropriate for their particular situation, the complicatedness of those policies, especially right now. But this is just kind of to also underscore that it actually is something that, in terms of student satisfaction, students are more likely to be engaged, which if you read any research on kind of like how to like slay in college and how to like do the best in college, it's engagement. Like that's one of the key recipes to success. And if students are in environments where it's less empowering, there's more apathy, the way that the classes are taught, or kind of I don't like the term rigor per se. I think that it's kind of like a word in admissions space, but if they're able to push past kind of like what the current educational system is that they're in, it's going to be harder for them to actually want to stay there and to be motivated to graduate, which is the goal, right? To get that degree and to be able to have that credential saying like, I'm ready to step into all these varieties of postgraduate pathways. So that's just another thing to touch on. And I think the next slide or so, I think this is actually going to be a chart of just a few. This is just to underscore how some schools that do have high financial aid policies and these large endowments and these small acceptance rates, there's a spectrum of how certain colleges are doing when it comes to serving low income students. And that's not super surprising. And I have some resources to point you all at the end of the presentation to help you understand which colleges are doing a better job with social mobility. In fact, actually, if you look at a lot of colleges and universities across the board, Cal State Los Angeles, California State University Los Angeles, is known to be, from a academic, statistical perspective, the institution in the US that springboards the majority of students from low income backgrounds to a socioeconomic status that was not the part of their upbringing, right? So we do focus a lot on these, I'd say, more selective colleges, because for especially certain students of a financial aid profile or income profile, schools like a Pomona, Swarthmore, college, I thought I saw College of the Holy Cross, which was like, yay, it's not on this particular chart. Amherst College, you're noticing, right, that there is a higher percent, in terms of proportionally, at a lot of these smaller liberal arts colleges, there is a higher percentage proportionally of their student body who identify as low income and Pell eligible students. Big shout out to Pomona, right? That's a school that I worked at for, I think it might be on the next slide. Or maybe I missed out on the previous one. Either way, I think 35% of the students identify as low income at Pomona. And the challenge here, though, right, is that smaller liberal arts colleges, places like Swarthmore, Bowdoin College in Maine, for a lot of students from first generation low income backgrounds, many of whom come from urban environments, they don't see a lot of people who look like them in the town of Brunswick, Maine. And I can speak from experience, because that's where my mom lives. And that's where I go home for summers. So it's that challenge, right, of there's these options that are out there that are great on paper in terms of financial aid policies, opportunities for students to land research internships, personal, connections with faculty. And yet for many students, those can be really big pills to swallow, especially if they have not been to an environment like that. They didn't grow up in a rural area. So that's another challenge too, in terms of the list building process, is trying to suss out the students that you're working with, their comfort level with schools that are really unfamiliar in terms of the environment. And any of these, schools, especially if they're predominantly white institutions, do present challenges when it comes to acclimation and student success. But definitely they can be magnetized by certain situational factors like geography, urban, rural, suburban, and elements like that can make it hard to recommend certain colleges that seem like they're a great match, but there's just more complexity to that piece. So we kind of went into this a little bit. So this is more kind of just a summary of kind of what I just described. But definitely colleges not being super great about listing like average sticker prices for different income levels is a big contributor to this, right? Because you see a sticker price, you Google cost of a college, you see, how much the sticker price is, and that's just going to immediately coil people up, and not oftentimes there's not even kind of the a way of kind of understanding like the breakdown of like, okay, but for my situation, this is not going to be actually the reality. And also, many students who enroll at schools that are more selective, they do have high unmet needs. So that's another thing to just be aware of, to communicate to families around things like travel, things like during school breaks, where do students go? That's something that I know a lot of students that I work with at Pomona really talked about a lot, struggle with. Some colleges are better than others at having things like emergency grants to allow students to go fly home, or kind of receive either whether it's books or supplies, or there's lots of literature kind of on attending these schools, especially during school breaks, and not having dining halls be open for students. So those are things I think, especially when you're at the end of kind of the list building process and students got into a range of schools, this is another kind of piece in terms of like preparing students for college, is that awareness of kind of like things to get in place and scholarships outside, private scholarships to apply to, so that you have some collateral, I guess you could call it, to help combat some of these unmet needs that sometimes are not factored into individual colleges' financial aid calculations. That's kind of what the last, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to add a little piece when we talked about the sticker shock price, right? And I think in the previous slides, we're looking at the percentage of students that are going with a household income less than 30,000, right? It's thinking of, when we're seeing the cost of colleges and universities going up, like some of our 80,000, 90,000, and you have a family that's making 15, 20, maybe 30, right? This is an amount of money that many of our families have never seen in their life, right? Or that it's even double of what they even bring home. And so there's this guilt, right, that I can't provide for my kid, right, that are some of our parents internalize, and our students feel guilty of, how am I going to put this pressure on my family, right? And so that's where sometimes this sticker shock really comes through with some of our students when they look at the expense or the cost of attendance of some of these schools. And so that's why the financial literacy and the financial aid packaging and breaking all of that down is so crucial to the process, to really break it down for parents and students so that they're supported, that yes, and there's support, there's finance, there's different ways to
Yeah.
finance, that it's not just about debt. And if it is, this is what we do recommend, right? So
Yeah.
just a different way of how some of our families see this, and it's hitting hard in those conversations sometimes.
Yeah. Even like, if you have a bulletin board space in your school or CBO office, right? Like, and putting kind of like, and that's to Nitya's point about the importance of data collection with the students and families you work with. Like, if you were to get, for example, like average aid package from students, in addition to like, where did they end up? You can literally put like, here's, a bunch of schools that our students went to. Congrats, class of 2024, sticker price, average cost for insert school CBO students. Like, that's a way to kind of be like, oh, dang, like, I didn't know that I could go to Scripps College, which I've never really heard of before, and is in Southern California. Like, and that would potentially be more a price that like relates to, especially if you're coming from a school where many, the majority of the students are coming from similar socioeconomic backgrounds. That's a great strategy to be able to kind of like visually get that message out there as much as you possibly can, or in slideshows, intro to college presentations.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
collecting that data can be really empowering for your local community, because it's one thing to see like average price for someone, of this state or whatnot, but it's another thing to see it from the place you're actually coming from, your actual
Yes.
school or CBO. Yeah.
Yes.
So if you want to go to the next slide, you can skip that one actually. The one that looks heinous. We can just run it anyway. These are just a few other things that I wanted to touch on as well, that are contributing to just undermatching more broadly, right? I'm sure if you're a counselor coming from a district where you don't receive a lot of college visitors, I know, for example, I don't know if people know this, but in Slate, which is a CRM that lots of colleges use, so it would be like the equivalent of a Naviance, or a Score or Maya Learning, but for a college. They actually have this tool called Voyager that you can layer over census data of income levels. And many colleges, because they are tuition dependent,
Mm.
majority of them, right? They're tuition driven. So admissions officers are asked to go to certain areas of the country where there is a more correlation with students who are able to pay the full price. So that's something that, I know from my own recruitment experience and putting together my travel, I was really lucky to work at places like Holy Cross and Pomona that had those need blind financial aid policies, that generosity when it comes to prioritizing first generation low income student recruitment. But it's not the norm in the college landscape, unfortunately, which also limits the amount of exposure that students get like right in school. Plus, I will also just say candidly that even those school visits, like on the high school end, when I sat through a bunch of them, I was like, dang, like I can understand why students don't want to sit through these, because they're a little dry and really repetitive. So if you're a college rep tuning in, any spicy anecdotes and ways to zhuzh it up, whether it's Ariana Grande or what, never goes wrong. And I guess that kind of goes similar to the second point that I just made of, many of these colleges have lots of, if you look at kind of some of the previous charts, right, of a lot of different colleges and universities and the really low percent of students who are Pell eligible or low income that are enrolling there, many times it's because of the athletic teams that they have, and because of legacy policies and all these kind of areas of essentially what some people coin as affirmative action for the wealthy, that are still very much in effect at many colleges and universities. And then, of course, just the barriers of like getting things done, like the CSS profile and all the additional questions that some colleges ask. So there's a lot, that, in terms of overcomplicated. I feel like I'm just stirring that up even more and more. And it's a great opportunity to turn the mic over to Nitsa, someone who has done, I think, incredible work in all the different schools and communities she's worked in, at exposing different populations to such a broad range of options that are a good match for them. So take it away, Nitsa.
Yeah, so thank you. We can go to the next slide. Just really high level. Obviously, I've said that in my intro that I worked at CBOs, I worked in public high schools, I worked in public charter schools and the community colleges as well. And predominantly, I've been working with first-gen low-income students. And every student's journey is different, but sometimes the reasonings or the factors that impact the student's decision align thematically, right, that we've been touching about. So we can go to the next slide. Um, this is just some examples of where our students have matriculated and attended in the past. So we see a a variety of schools, which is great, and we celebrate. We celebrate everywhere students go, regardless of what it is. And I think one of the things that we're also doing more is incorporating students who are attending community colleges, right, and doing other paths that may be called alternative paths, but celebrating the journey that our students are doing and letting them know that if they're ever ready to go back to a 4-year, we're here for them. There's way they can do it. Other peers have done it because I think again the exposure of seeing peers like them that have gone and done it and been successful is very empowering for our students to see that they can do it also, right? It's a great motivator. So we can go, yeah, thank you. So recently I love collecting data in the work that we do because it really allows us to analyze the work that we've been doing, the growth of our programming. And so recently, these are the top 5 colleges that our students apply to this last application cycle. And we see some overlap, I think, no, CSU's, UC's really, right? And it's heavy because that's what our students know. That's what is marketed to our students. And if you can see one of our schools, our students are very heavy in, it's very regional, right? It's very one specific site or one specific place. And so one of the things that we've done intentionally and strategically is if this is where students are applying, that's great. And as we're planning for future conversations with students, we're planning our programming points like college tours or visits or who we're bringing onto campus, what are the schools that we're missing? What are the opportunities that we can really open up for students in a different way? Because we know they hear about Merced, we know they hear about Berkeley, we know they hear about Stanford. What about, Cal Maritime? What about Channel Islands, right? What about all these other opportunities that our students might not have the resources to do these visits on by themselves. So let's leverage the connections that we have. If we know that a partner school is bringing somebody in, hey, come in for lunch, talk to our students as well. Right. So again, we like to see them compare historically where our students are applying, and that's much to celebrate that our students are opening up to new opportunities and exposure. Next slide, please. And with that, we also collected the intended majors for our students, which is really interesting to see, right? Some overlap. We see biological sciences is huge, engineering is huge, and then a little bit of a difference of a separation with business ecology, political science. The numbers next to that means how many seniors applied with that specific major, right? And so for us in collecting this, and we see what their students are thinking about in terms of what they want or are interested in studying, right? And it's interesting that they're able to share it in data collection, and sometimes in a one-on-one conversation they shy away as if they're like, oh, I don't want to talk about what I want to study. But this is key because then, like, okay, if our students are interested in bioscience and engineering or the arts or political science, then what programs are out there, what schools are doing a really good job at this that we can start bringing those reps here. Or if, and we'll talk about some other resources, social media or tours, like virtual tours that we can start showing that highlight some of these programs that our students can venture on. So just different ways that we use our data to strengthen the programming that we offer. Yes, so some of the insights I've worked in a lot of various institutional places, and one of the things that I've seen is in the CBOs that I used to work at, we had students that went to independent private school. And what's interesting about those particular students is that they were more open or tended to be more open to apply outside of the state and to more selective schools. Right. And sometimes it's like I had a student a couple years ago applied to Ireland and left to Ireland, right? The University of Limerick. And she was going to an independent school. And I'm like, how did you hear about this school? Oh, they were at my college fair. right? And it was a lot cheaper. It was faster. They're trying to go into law school, and her family actually picked up and left and moved out there, which I thought was also very interesting. They got really motivated about the opportunities abroad. But I think there's something about the space of independent schools that our students are exposed to more college fairs, more reps, the conversations that are happening. And I think that's great. And why we can do that also in CBO spaces and public schools as well, and we can do it better, right? How do we partner with the local schools also that are bringing in the programs? Like we bring in San Jose State. Hey, San Jose State, can you also bring in resources for your first gen students that you offer on campus, career services, right? To really highlight that there's more than just the academics and the programming. The other piece in working with community college students is that a lot of our students tend to stay in California, obviously because of articulation agreements, their credits will transfer, the cost. Um, but sometimes our students are like, well, could I transfer somewhere out of state? And I think one of the things that we could do better in, and not just us, but like let's leverage our network to advocate is articulation agreements from other schools so that students can plan their educational courses and their units and making sure that they're transferring on time. Because I think our transfer students are ready after 2 or 3 years, are like, I want something more and I want something different, right? And sometimes they may feel that they're limited to just the schools in their neighborhood for, again, some of the same reasons that we talked about, expense, moving, but they're hungry. And I think, like, again, how are we leveraging transfer college fairs to expose them to different opportunities? Again, but that might be better financial aid packaging, better resources for them to finish and try something new. One of the things that we've done in our with our data collection and strategic, because of expense, I think affordability is one of the biggest factors in students under matching, right? Um, so we did leverage San Jose State as an affordable, commutable opportunity for students to apply. So everyone that qualified, you're applying to San Jose State. Not to say that that's where you're going, right? Because I think sometimes our students listen to that. They're like, oh, you're limiting me. That's not what we're doing. We're just letting them think like, look, strategically, financially, this may be an option in less than a year, right? From September to May. And guess what? A lot of our students did end up falling in love with San Jose State. So we're glad that had that option in the first place. But again, it's how are we informing students of why we're recommending certain colleges, right? Because I think sometimes with undermatching, our students may feel that we're limiting their resources, we're limiting their options, and it's no, here's what we've seen. Again, we highly recommend students for certain pieces. They're going to make the decision at the end. And there's benefits of our state schools. They're not bad. And we're not saying that they shouldn't be applying there. But sometimes our really hungry students may miss an opportunity from other schools. The challenge with commuter schools is that we don't talk about the commuting experience, especially for our FGLI students, right? Because sometimes those factors, they're not allowed to live on the dorms. They need to commute. That's why they need to commute. So the responsibilities hit harder. The conversations with families need to be more intentional. They need to work more, or they can't get involved on campus. Tom talked about engagement and the sense of belonging, and that is still very key for our students if they're commuters. And I think one of the things that our students end up thinking about as they're graduating from these spaces is like, I want to go somewhere else. I'm like, great, let's finish your degree. Where do you want to go for your master's? Right? Let's think ahead, and I think a lot of our students get really excited and build those skills that they need to really think abroad. And again, how are they leveraging their resources on the campuses? They're paying tuition and fees for a reason, right? Go to your career center, go to the job fairs, the college fairs that they have for professional schools, etc. So I think there's just different ways that we can balance the conversations that we're having with students to again, show the pros and cons, because not every school is perfect, and it's not going to be perfect for every single one because every student's journey and experience is different. Again, so some of the key takeaways that we've explored is taking notice this is where data is so helpful for us, is taking notice of what our data is showing us. Other than where our students are applying, where are they deciding to go? Right. So we have a lot of pockets of students going to Santa Cruz, San Jose State, Merced, but we see that their financial aid package was really great somewhere else and they decided not to go. Then we have a conversation, not as a why didn't you go, like we're scolding them, but for us to inform our practice, where did we miss? What did we miss in terms of informing you better? Right. And so again, exposing them to different schools that they might not be aware of. The financial aid packaging, we had a student had a full right to read, ended up, I don't want to go there. It's a predominantly white institution. Let me go somewhere else. But they were gapped thousands of dollars. And so for us, if we would have had that conversation earlier of how to help them navigate a predominantly white institution, because there are resources and their students know how to navigate these spaces because they've done it before, right? Maybe there would have been a different choice and felt empowered and safer to go to a school and then have no debt, right? Um, I think one of the things that we think about is how do we intentionally bring awareness of other options when we ourselves, our institutions, don't have those resources, right? So I think one of the resources that we're going to share are some college fly-ins for students, where students will be flown in and they need to apply, and again, it offers them an opportunity to view other places. If there's local tours, like colleges that changes lives is coming, they visit different places, and again, it's an exposure for students. Have the reps trying to come into your school to have those conversations, and I think letting them know, hey, we have a predominantly FGLI population. Can you please highlight some of the resources that your school is providing to ensure that when they get there, they're supported? Right? Do you have a student panel that maybe we can zoom in and they can talk about their experience at your campus? Or we also like to connect with the student support services of college campuses, because they are becoming more intentional of the challenges that some of our students may face. Hey, zoom them in, right? You have affinity groups, you have career centers, you have student groups that support students specifically because they're FGLI. Zoom them in and have them have those open conversations with students so that they know they can be seen and they know that they belong in the spaces as well. Tom,
Thank
back
you,
to you.
Heather. Thank you. Yeah. And actually, Diana, I'll take over screen share just because there's some links that I was going to click on and walk people through. So I'll just save you, I think, a lot of like guessing what I'm about to do. Yeah, and I think something that I'm going to share with you all on this session that I think will be hopefully really helpful in terms of like, there are limited spots, for lack of a better word, right, at these selective colleges that often have generous financial aid programs for low-income students. And we're trying, of course, to prevent students from being gapped very heavily between their, purported need based on flawed financial aid documents and the sticker price that a college has. And a lot of it has to do with, I'd say, up-leveling your school profile. So I'm just going to, at the end of this, I'm just going to walk through a few insights and tidbits about kind of like what Nitzia was saying about like getting reps to pay attention to your school and understand the community that your students are coming from, the level of college motivation that's there, the things that you're all doing on the ground to increase that college going culture, letting admissions reps know that, by a profile and kind of having that document to be like, oh, wow, like this school is like really combating a lot of norms in their region, or they're doing all these really great innovative things to increase that exposure. It makes them more likely to want to add them to their recruitment list and to kind of add them to the stop of being a firsthand resource for our students and families. So my experience in working in a school has been very different than Nitzia's, right? In terms of growing up, my mom's actually a public school teacher in Springfield, Massachusetts, or she was for the longest time until moving to Maine. And Springfield is definitely an area that struggles with a lot of the challenges that many of our schools face when it comes to resources, understaffing, etc. So definitely grew up very peripherally present to that reality, and feel very fortunate that was something that was not my personal experience. And I was shocked even to kind of go to the extreme. I was not extreme, but like the next slide here kind of underscores the school that I worked at, which is in Seattle, Washington. So it was interesting when you were saying that like working at the independent school, private high school side, there was more like students were more willing to look at different options, essentially. Interestingly, right, like one of my biggest challenges working at a school where students really focused a lot on elite colleges, name brand schools, that it's a challenge, I'd say, in American society more broadly, right? Like it's kind of the schools that just fall outside that tier of name recognition that I know from my personal experience are harder to get a wide variety of populations to be comfortable with. I think increasingly there are more and more students who are getting interested, for example, in schools abroad internationally, especially if they're like, I know what I want to study and I need these AP scores, and then I can send in the app and I don't have to worry about all these other things. For some students, financially and for their personal goals, that makes a lot of sense. So one of my biggest challenges working in a private high school that has kind of this name brand school fixation, right, is that the advice that we would try to give to statistically the largest range of students who were not first-gen low-income students, although the school, I'd say, did a great job with trying to increase pipelines with the CBO that's really common in Seattle, Rainier Scholars. So a lot of Rainier Scholars were students at Lakeside, and so we were glad to know that they had support outside of the school in addition to what we were providing, to give that first-gen low-income student perspective and the individualized support with their Rainier Scholar counselor. But I had students on my caseload who were not part of that CBO program and who going to general presentations where we're trying to talk students down a few pegs in terms of like overinflated expectations of where they should go. It's difficult, right? When you want to have like that section of the presentation that's like, but for some of you tuning into the audience, actually, you should throw your hat in because college is, you have a lot to contribute to these places and you may not see yourself there. So it can be difficult, and for some of you tuning in to wrestle with that. Something that I really want to just underscore, if you are coming from a school similar to where I worked, where it is predominantly a white and or wealthier school, is some of the counseling tendencies that were really exposed through the, I don't know if any of you recall the Black at accounts that kind of sprung up at the period of George Floyd's murder. It was something that a lot of students were voicing, hey, based on my school experience, I was told not to put these schools on my list because I had no chance of getting in there. And I did it anyway, and I got in. So I think in terms of kind of like our roles, right? Like we're not there to kind of be like the I know better than you, and you shouldn't waste your time applying there. Like with any students that I work with, I'm like, you have nothing to lose with time and or potentially money by applying to these places. What I don't want you to do is be left with no options or very, very few options. So I think especially those accounts really underscored the need in some of these wealthier schools to kind of have there be more exposure around these particular topics. And one of the biggest recommendations that I would give, I would say, is to really push for in-school instructional time and to cover sessions with all the students that are there around things like financial aid, because that's really, really important for students to be able to understand. And it's one of the areas where students oftentimes don't have the capacity as always as much to go afterwards to school, whether that's through work commitments that they have, their family isn't able to join them. So that's just something I'd really push for. All right, so best practices and resources. This is kind of something that I'd say we've underscored with a lot of our anecdotal pieces. But I do kind of want to just underscore that this is a particular quote from NCAN related to a study on undermatching specifically for Hispanic Latinx students. And again, kind of just like the individualization based on your school community is first and foremost here. But one thing, that we really want to kind of underscore is partnerships with these, community-based organizations and larger scale opportunities and networks. So Nitya, I don't know if any of the resources or kind of the CBOs or networks or college access organizations mentioned here have been particularly great for students that you've worked with to leverage, but I don't know if you want to speak on this point a little more.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes we feel like like, oh my God, I have more work to do on my plate. And there are a lot of partnerships, a lot of colleagues who are doing amazing work that would be willing to partner with us and bring that lens and that perspective and their resources. And they want to work with our students, right? I will say, like, I volunteered for Match Lighters. I think it's a great way to give back to our students and our very, strong students who deserve that one-on-one support as well. So again, there's different ways that I think we can give back, and other ways that we can partner up with those resources and peers that are willing to help us too, to support more students in this process.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, this is another one kind of just in terms of, I know we've talked a lot about exposure and giving kind of different suggestions on how to do that. One thing that I kind of want to underscore just a little bit, and I'll stop sharing the slides real quick just to show you this, is related to having students. It's funny, I have a couple of tabs open here. Having students apply for summer programs prior to, or have an awareness of kind of like college pro college going opportunities, whether those are research internships, summer programs on different high school and or college campuses. That's something that, in addition to fly-in programs, which are definitely more tailored to students going through the actual application process, some of these early programs are really, really beneficial to students. So I just wanted to give a shout out to the Achievement First High School Network, which is in Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New York. There's a series of charter schools that are really, committed to closing the achievement gap when it comes to particularly students of color, and opportunities at summer, at a wide range of colleges and universities, but also they've been really proactive in terms of their hiring efforts. And of course, again, this is something that, right, like depending on your budget, the school you work at, it's like, it'd be nice to hire someone whose job this is, but that's not always as possible, right? But really kind of applauding and seeing kind of the benefit. I don't know how many of you, I know a book that myself and Diana and Erica Copeland, who's the director of the Match Later Scholars Program, have talked about a lot, is The Privileged Poor. So it's a book kind of that describes the differences between students that Tony Jack, the book's author, describes as privileged poor. So students who have exposure to predominantly white spaces, spaces where there are more affluent students than the environment that they come from, and kind of having that ease of transition period, whether that's going through a program like Prep for Prep or ABC, A Better Chance, programs that have students who come from underrepresented backgrounds going to more elite prep schools, and places along those lines. This is a way for, I think, students to have that exposure, and awareness of kind of just kind of what's out there and how it might be different than what they're used to from the schools that they've gone to previously, in a way that's not as a long-term commit, right? It's not their entire school experience, but attending a summer program at a place like Phillips Exeter for a few months or a few weeks, will definitely, I'd say, be a shock for students in many ways. But having that happen earlier on, especially if they are going to be considering schools like this, is going to not have the shock be so stark when they actually end up potentially enrolling at one of those places. So that's a big piece too. And also, being competitive for a lot of these colleges, right? I think colleges are really great about, and I really stand on this, reading students in context. But right, students who have really, impressive research and internship experiences and things kind of on their resume, those are students that typically have a little more attention at some of these selective colleges. And I know, for example, very candidly, that I've worked with, I know colleagues who work at different selective schools who have said we are more comfortable admitting students, right, from who have documented experiences, or even the students who have a B average at places like in Exeter or Andover, than some of the schools where the college success is more unstable, right? So I'm not saying, right, that you should have every student kind of like combat this, but what I'm saying is, like, it's something that exposure to these programs can be very, very beneficial for both their candidacy, but also their awareness of like what's out there, and how to prepare themselves accordingly. Visiting schools. Nitya, I wanted to have you take the second bullet point here, because I know this was something that you told me was really great work with your students.
Yeah, I think sometimes our families, especially for FGLI families, don't know that they can visit schools and visit campuses on their own, right? I think they need like permission to be in these spaces. And so sometimes we say like, look, it doesn't have to be a super formal tour. Go see what they have for fun. Like we recommend students, if there's a college basketball game or a soccer game, go and see it and sit down. If you're traveling, a lot of our families tend to travel over the summer to go visit family somewhere else. See if you can stop at a different college, right? Here's a map, here's where you can park, and just different ways that they can also venture this as families. So they, one, parents will feel more comfortable in sending their kids because they know that the area is safe, but it's also tied in a different way that college can be seen in a different light. It's not just academics. There's also a social life there, which is super important for students to find a different perspective and value to it too. You're muted.
Thank you. Yeah, group tours. And sorry that it doesn't look as pretty, but just because there's links in the tabs, it's just easier for me to like click on them in a second. Group tours for 9th and 10th graders. So this is something that we offered at many different selective colleges offer these. So if you're able to organize, especially in your local area, tours for 9th and 10th graders, 11th graders, that's something that I know Alejandro Guerrero Vargas, one of the head tour guides at Pomona, he always said to me, he's like, it's because of programs like that when I was in early on in high school that like, admittedly, I was more attracted to like the dining hall and, you know, the dorms and things like that. But like, it made me more acclimated to the possibilities that are out there more so than I would have done if I didn't go on these tours. So that can be definitely something that can really help. This point here, I would love Nita if you want to take a minute to just kind of talk about this a little bit, because this was something that I thought was really profound when you were sharing this with me and prepping for the session.
Yeah, I think a lot of our students are motivated, our FGLI students are motivated to go to college because of the sacrifices. I hear this often, like so many times. I'm doing this because of my family. I'm doing this because I want to give back to them. I'm doing this because of the sacrifices they have made. And with that, sometimes our students feel guilty of leaving their families for college, right? So it's almost like we need to flip the script, or I flip the script with them of like, well, this is your time to give back to your family, you know, to reward the sacrifices that they've done is for you to go to college and come back, but come back with your degree, right? It's what I tell them. You can always come back with your degree. And I think it's just a different lens of empowering them, the student, that they can make this choice, and there's always a different way for them to come back because there might be some guilt attached to it, but that they're not alone. And so it makes them feel comfortable, a little bit more comfortable, like, yeah, I can do this too. And then it's okay.
Yeah. We used to profile a lot of students at Pomona who particularly came from rural communities. And
Yeah.
there's a whole like magazine spread that talked about how, hey, if you want to combat some of the issues that you're seeing in your local area, like you can go away for a period of time and then come back, right? And make that impact when you have the skills and the knowledge and the background to be equipped to
Yep.
address that. Fly-in programs, we talked about this a decent amount, right? But fly-in programs are an amazing opportunity for students. But they really do, I'd say, involve oftentimes counselor intervention and priming, right? Because unfortunately, a lot of the application deadlines, colleges want to get kids on their campus before that early decision deadline. They want to like make their pitch basically to students as to why this might be a great option for them and give them a chance to apply through early decision or through, you know, a matching process like QuestBridge, which is in October, which is wild. So definitely your assistance in exposing students to these programs is a huge opportunity. And the way that I pitch fly-in programs is that if you're curious about the elusive, am I good enough to be admitted and admissible? This is basically like a pre-read at these schools because they're not going to admit you if you're not a competitive applicant and student to the fly-in program. They're not going to pay for you to come out there if you're not admissible. And as long as you go on the program, you know, and even students who don't end up going on the program but were still admitted for the fly-in, like it still benefits your application to have done that. So that's definitely a good way to kind of like pitch the benefit of like, hey, you want to know, like, you know, if you're going to be competitive at Princeton, maybe try applying for the fly-in program. You might see that.
And if they get accepted, such a confidence booster for those students, and then they get to see and experience, they're like, oh, I can do this. I'm like, yes, you can.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. So I know we're running short on time. So just know that you all will have in the chat the slide deck with all the resources that we have here linked, the sources to some of the stats that we provided. And one that I just wanted to point to real quickly before we wrap up is a database that is actually used by the Match Later Scholars Program. So a huge shout out to Logan Shearer, who works at a CBO community-based organization in the Chicagoland area called Schuler Scholars. And the point of this spreadsheet and these schools is, again, to underscore, these are the schools that meet 100% of demonstrated need that are on here. So understandably, these are going to be ones that are a great match for a lot of students who have that low income profile. However, I think what I really like to call attention to is what Logan refers to as likely gambles. So these are schools that don't exactly meet 100% of demonstrated need on average, but they have their own financial aid budget and their secret sauce as to why certain students may be given a package that other students are not. Sometimes it's to yield a student from a certain state, or they want to increase students of different populations, whatever it may be. These are schools where there is a possibility of a gap. However, there's actually a possibility that the school decides, through whoever is in charge or whatnot, to actually give the package that the average percent of need met. Some students are going to be higher than that. So that's just something I'd say, especially when you're working with students with a wide range of academic credentials. These schools are understandably going to be tougher, right? Just based on the acceptance rates that are there. The data here is kind of showing a little bit of kind of whether or not the school has things like loan caps to help protect students from taking out too many loans. But these are competitive schools to get into for any applicant, objective of, context, just based academically. So that's something that these schools definitely have a broader range of that. And the further you go down, the more risky it gets. But it's always, I'd say, great to have a few schools like this on students' lists, especially if they meet qualities that are similar to some of the schools that are maybe more name brand or meet that 100% of need that would be eligible for them. And then lastly, I just kind of wanted to point your attention to these slides that if you want to use these in any presentations you do, or just in exposure to your students, there's also some works cited at the bottom of them as well. These are just slides that kind of underscore some options that don't always go as discussed or aren't always as familiar to different students in terms of their benefits. So, options like women's colleges can be really, really great options for high achieving young women, especially women in STEM. They have some of the best retention rates for particularly women of color who are looking to pursue STEM. MSIs, of course, have different challenges when it comes to affordability sometimes, and always, like, financial aid policies are not always the best match for every student. But in terms of the empowerment that they can represent to students of different groups, it is very telling, right? Of especially, for example, I always highlight this stat here from the Gallup poll on student satisfaction of students who attend predominantly white institutions who are Black, in comparison to those who attend HBCUs, and seeing kind of that feeling supported number be so disparate between different schools. If you're working with a student who's voicing, I want more solidarity with people who look like me, who come from my background, that's something definitely to expose them to, of course. Honors college is another great option. Institute of Technology, kind of touch on this a little bit. Need to talk a little bit about international schools, which again can be tricky with funding because many of them don't have as many aid opportunities, but great to kind of just inform people about. And then also, like, I don't know, Nitya, if you've had too many students that you've worked with gap years. I think that can be a scary venture for people.
Yeah, we don't officially have students that say I want to like the formal gap year, like where they go and do something, but we do have students that want to work and take some time off, which is great. I think one of the things we want to work with those students is make a plan before they leave us of what does this look like and what's their plan to come back or like go back to school. And so then we come up with the plan. What are you going to do? When should you reach out to me? Let's make an appointment right now. What schools are you interested in? Contact information. And then we kind of make a plan to touch base so that we can set that plan in motion, because sometimes our students just leave and then that's it. We don't hear from them again, or they're super lost because they don't have a plan to follow. And I just want to look up time, and I think there's a couple of questions you got there, Tom, that might be good for you to touch base on.
Yes, sure. So just to answer the two questions that came in the Q&A. So one is, in cases of parents, middle class, that file the FAFSA, but then push the student to take out a huge loan, rather than the student has no financial means, can such student be considered low income because the student is affording college to themselves vis-a-vis colleges? Unfortunately, the answer for most colleges is no. So it's very difficult for students to prove financial independence from their family. And the expectation with most of these financial aid forms is that if you are a dependent child, that unless you have emancipation from your family and kind of documentation to prove that, colleges, the federal government, anyone kind of putting these financially calculations together will take that into consideration. For those of you working with students who may have non-custodial parents, there are colleges that actually are, the new FAFSA has possibly complicated this, but there are lists of schools that you can look at that actually don't require CSS profile or certain documentation around that. So that's an option. You see, I don't know if I have anything else to touch on with that question.
With the financial aid, talk to financial aid office.
Yeah.
Talk to the financial aid office. I think it's the best thing, and have the student talk to the financial aid officer. And sometimes they'll make professional judgment with more information, but it has to be like clear information of what is happening with the household, and the student has to make that conversation with the financial aid office. So
yeah, but yeah, I will just say it can be an uphill battle with that particular situation of unwillingness to pay is not really a rationale that colleges will accept for the most part. But you never know. Maybe reference Ariana Grande might help. I'm not sure. I often encourage students to write to admissions offices to ask for a free application. Is there a secret language I should use to indicate to colleges that I'm a low-income student, I'm interested, but can't really apply because it's so expensive? Most colleges, in my experience, are pretty open with granting fee waivers to students. There's lots of different ways to get them too, right? So you can either have your counselor include a letter of support or kind of sign off that you're a student who's eligible from their experience for fee waivers. I did that for the students that I worked with who identified as low income, just so that they had that ready to go. And then any school that they applied to was kind of automatically included through SCORE. There's also, of course, any of the Common App. If you go to the fee waiver section, you'll see kind of all the different options that are listed out there. And you kind of just have to have, be able to check off one of those and have the documentation accordingly. But a lot of schools will grant it if you email their admissions at, insertcollege.edu general account. Many of them are pretty generous with them, I would say. So it never hurts to ask. The worst thing that they say is no, or we want more information, or maybe they say yes. Actually, probably they'll say yes. So that's one thing definitely to.
Or, right, if you're a NACAC member, you can get the NACAC fee waiver for a college application. So be a NACAC member for that, and you can fill it out, send it to the admissions office.
We love NACAC. Love to see it. And the last question that was submitted, sorry for going a little bit over on time, is there are just so many dang colleges out there. Absolutely right. I think there's 2,800 four-year college jury-granting colleges in the U.S. Any tips for keeping track of information that I learn about a newer college counselor so I can recommend schools to students? I think it means as a newer college counselor. Any tips, Nita?
Yeah, no, I hear you. Sometimes we get whiplash from all of the schools out there. And I think one is having grace with yourself. We're not going to know every school out there. It's not possible. I think one thing is we take it as we dive into our profession, some schools start popping out. I rely on colleagues a lot. I have this student, here's their profile. What have you recommended in the past? I'm trying to do a better job of keeping a live document in my Google Docs. Every time I visit a college, I take my notes and then I go like, okay, high level takeaways, a student that will fit in, keep a note of like strong programs, keep a note of like question or red flag that I still have, right? You don't have to know every single thing, but if you know some of those high level pieces, that helps. And again, at the end of the day, it's the students who like to do the research. So sometimes, okay, go get the research and come back with me. So that also gives me more information of a school I might not know of, but they're doing the work. So it's a partnership in learning about colleges. Because yes, there's just so many out there. I had a colleague who takes the FIS guide, and this is different. I don't know if I could do this. They take the FIS guide and they read the description of a college every single day, right? And I'm like, that's a way you could do it, but that's taking the time to do that. But be patient with yourself. And it starts getting better and easier, and you're not going to know every single college, and that's okay.
Yeah. College, I think Transitions, I want to say, or maybe it's College Express, has a list that we linked in the resources of kind of like list guides. So that's one that I'll just spotlight real quick because I think it's a really good one to tap into if volume of schools, themes of schools, like schools that are good for X program, X
College
major.
Finder, the book is by Dr. Stephen Antonoff, is also a good one.
Yes, so good. Yeah. So the college transitions dataverse. This is kind of, I believe it's the online version that's currently undergoing. They're working on a new edition, Dr. Antonoff on the book. And actually, we hosted a big webinar called Just a Guide to Get counselors to like put in a bunch of schools that they recommend to students for lots of obscure like things that people are looking for in a college. But this is a really, really great list to go to, I'd say, that has like, best, and these are vetted by counselors. And, I would say from my experience, I get very wary when I see anything that's like best X, because I feel like it oversimplifies it. But I've been pleasantly surprised with the range of schools that are represented on these particular Dataverse lists. And another thing that I'd recommend doing too is something that I did when I first started at Lakeside was looking at colleges that like are on the matriculation list or are popular among your current students, and then just literally Googling like schools similar to insert college, right? So, if Brown University is really popular because, they have an open curriculum and I can take whatever classes I want. There's a lot of schools that have open or very flexible curriculums. And that if that's the draw, then you can propose schools like that and then give your rationale as a counselor. Oh, here's why I wanted to include this on your list because you mentioned this. So this is similar. So that's definitely another strategy too that can, I'd say, help give you like, I'm big on spreadsheets. So having a list of those schools that are actually similar in many ways to some of the big ticket name brand schools that many people will know or a thing or two about. So it is 5:07 Pacific time. So I do want to keep people on more, even though this is a topic that we have lots of resources around, lots of different strategies. I think maybe one day, like a case study of like, what schools would you recommend to a student who tells you these things? I think that'd be a great kind of more collaborative 2.0 version of this webinar. But hey, Diana, an idea for another day.
Absolutely. And I'm writing it all down in the noggin.
Yes, I love it.
Tom and Nitzia, thank you both so much for your time and for your expertise. I just want to give kind of a disclaimer to everybody that a lot of the resources that were mentioned, best practices that were mentioned, we will be having kind of larger sessions on. So national programs, flying programs. So keep an eye out on our live event and webinar calendar. So you'll be able to see and register when those events pop up. If there are any other questions, topics you want to see discussed, again, that live session survey is the best way to kind of give us your input. Devin Simpson, I saw your name first in terms of who filled out the live session survey today. So we'll be in touch about getting you your free book. And yes, we are a healthy 8 minutes over with just a lot of things to think about and resources to sift through. So I just want to thank you both, Tom and Nitzia, once again for being here tonight. I look forward to seeing you all hopefully again soon at a future FGLI webinar session. And yeah, have a great night. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Y'all.